I heard you the other day. You said that we now find ourselves between Scylla and Charybdis. Narrow Greek mythology, narrow strait. Scylla is a six-headed monster over here, and Charybdis is a whirlpool over here. And in Greek myth, you had to navigate between these two, each of which was deadly. You described our Scylla and Charybdis. Actually, here's what you said in a recent paper that you wrote: the stable deterrence structures of the Cold War look much shakier as more countries acquire nuclear weapons. It seems far easier now than at any time since World War II to sleepwalk into an all-out conflict. So the prospect of Armageddon, let's call that Scylla. And here's Charybdis, an endless stagnation. I'm quoting from the same paper. We have grown attached to our soft, comfortable ways, but we do not want to name what they are protecting against. How bad, of course what I have in mind is the war in Ukraine. How bad is the Scylla, the prospect of Armageddon?
Well, the thing I want to say that's always nuanced and complicated is that it's quite bad, but we have to also weight it against the alternative. And
yes.
The extreme alternative is the sort of soft totalitarianism, a society that simply is locked down, where nothing happens. If you were to use the biblical terminology, it's the Antichrist, the one world totalitarian state, and there's always a sense where I think we should be at least as scared of the Antichrist as of Armageddon, and then certainly my contrarian intuition is that people are far more worried about Armageddon than they are worried about the one world state, and I would at least like us to worry about them equally, to worry both about Scylla and Charybdis.
Okay, so elaborate a little bit.
There are all these different versions. There's a recent paper by
the Armageddon we sort of talked about at the opening. Well, the Armageddon is we pursue science and we pursue technology, and it could all blow up in a nuclear war.
And then let's elaborate it.
Yes.
So if you don't if we're going to stop that, you can't just stop it locally. You have to stop it globally. You have to make sure that all scientists stop it. You have to make sure that they're being policed all over the world. And if there's some small piece of computer code that can lead to a runaway AGI, we need to have surveillance technology installed on every single laptop to make sure that people aren't typing in keystrokes to code up the AGI that's going to destroy the world. Or if you can, the nuclear weapons issue already from the 50s and 60s, what came with this multinational atomic energy agency that was going to, International Atomic Energy Agency, that was going to sort of monitor all these countries, and you needed a supranational structure with real teeth. And in practice, we ended up with something in between. We ended up with some kind of global superstate. It wasn't never quite that much. It was maybe not quite enough to fully stop Armageddon. It was never quite enough to be totalitarian. But those have been the bad alternatives for 77 years, and we need to find some way in between.
Okay, and the lockdown. We fear Armageddon too much.
We only talk about it strikes me we almost only talk about the Armageddon stuff, and we never talk about the sort of regulatory political lockdown that's the practical alternative, where everyone's just scared of their own shadow.
So if we put it, I'm trying to bring growth back into this. To pursue growth means in one way or another to have the courage to risk a certain degree of new innovation. We unleash technology and science again to produce growth, correct?
Yes.
All right. So, and why do you and I, because we have known each other a long time and think alike in some pretty basic ways, we both say growth and assume that that's a good. But let's make that explicit. Why do we need growth? What does that do for American society? And why is what happens, or the other way around, what happens to us in the absence of growth?
Well, we had, the Club of Rome wrote this book called The Limits to Growth, 1972, almost exactly 50 years ago. And it basically said that, the growth couldn't continue, and so we had to get used to a zero growth world. First, a world of zero population growth, then a world of zero economic growth. And there are all these ways that their agenda broadly has been implemented over the last 50 years. And it has, in some ways, perhaps it's stabilized the world, but it's also been profoundly destabilizing it's led to a world that's extremely nihilistic. It's led to the sort of cultural disintegration of the middle class, where you think of the middle class as the people who think their children will do better than themselves. And there's sort of all these ways the zero growth world hasn't worked out that well. So my intuition is that it's not simply stable. This is where I disagree with Dow, that it's not simply decadent or simply stable. It's not simply entropic. It's ultimately, there's ultimately a catastrophe on both sides.
So,
and there's an Armageddon catastrophe if you have unconstrained tech and science where no one's paying attention and people are just pushing buttons and seeing what happens. But there's also always a risk of a centralizing totalitarian catastrophe on the other side, which is the natural solution on how do you stop all science and tech. Is you need a one world state with real teeth,
which is within our grasp, humanity's grasp, as AI emerges.
Well, it's an answer to the nuclear problem. It's an answer to the environmental challenges. It's an answer to the AI challenges, and I would just submit it's not a good answer.
All right. So, sticking with growth, just for one more moment, if I were to close my eyes and just listen to the dulcet tones of Peter Thiel, a Republican pro-growth president gets elected in 2024. What's different? What's different about what's different about the temper or mood of the country? Could we hope that economic growth would soothe the bitterness of our politics? Is that what happens?
Sure. I think if you had growth that was non-inflationary, non-cancerous, non-apocalyptic, it would solve all our problems. And it would, now, I don't know how realistic it is or how easy it is to get there, but certainly, the extreme sort of Malthusian zero-sumness of the stagnation, extreme polarization, I'm not sure it would fully evaporate, but it would be lessened significantly. And without growth, I'm certainly very convinced the negative version of this, where without growth, you're not going to solve the polarization, you're not going to solve the nihilism, the anger, any of those things at all.
Okay. Last question, although it'll take me a moment to set it up. Franklin Roosevelt, we have a rendezvous with destiny. John Kennedy, we will bear any burden, oppose any foe. Again and again and again in American history, we have found ourselves required to display courage as citizens and as a nation. Because the choice has been be courageous or lose. All right. George Kennan, this is 1953 at the outset of the Cold War. I mentioned Kennan a moment ago as the author of The Long Telegram. This is from a book he wrote early in the Cold War, 1953. The thoughtful observer of Russian-American relations will find no cause for complaint in the Kremlin's challenge. He will rather experience a certain gratitude to Providence, which has made our entire security as a nation dependent on our pulling ourselves together and accepting the responsibilities of moral and political leadership that history plainly intended us to bear. Well, what do you think? Can there be, if this is the moment in which we find ourselves, there's Armageddon and there's stagnation and creeping world government, and they're there. We have no choice but to be courageous. Can there be something ennobling about this? Can we pull ourselves together again?
Well,
Can it feel adventurous?
Well, it is certainly something like this frame is correct. It matters what we do. It's a world in which, we need courage. We need some kind of agency. The choices we make really matter. I don't think, yes, Armageddon and the world government are exclusionary possibilities. They're not exhaustive. I do think there's some narrow or not terribly broad, way in between, but it's
there's a way.
But there's a way, and there's a lot for us to do there.
It matters what we do.
Yeah, obviously it matters a lot.
Peter Thiel, thank you.